So anyone that hasn't been sleeping under a rock for the past few months knows that the real estate market's on fire, not just in Florida, but pretty much everywhere across the United States. However, what a lot of people aren't thinking about or talking about is how all of this could come to an end. And that's exactly what I'm going to cover in this video today. If you've been paying attention to real estate markets in the past, or you know a thing or two about real estate, you know that what goes up must come down. However, in every market cycle, things take a little bit different path each time. The markets do go up and they go down, but the factors that cause those things to happen are usually different every single time. And in today's video, that's exactly what we're going to talk about. And let's get right into it. Now, just so you know, a lot of these things I'm going to talk about could apply to the real estate market across the entire country, but some of them will be specific to Florida. So I just want to mention that because some of these things aren't going to be relevant depending on where you live. Now, the first one that definitely affects all of the real estate markets is going to be the money printing. In case you're unaware, the federal government has added more than $4 trillion in new money printed since the beginning of the pandemic, when they first started doing the stimulus packages, sending out the stimulus checks, and trying to get the economy up and running again with the PPP loans and the unemployment, etc. All of that extra money is now into the system, and it's floating out there around there somewhere. And a lot of it, I believe, has made its way into the stock markets and the real estate markets because a lot of this money had to go somewhere, and the people who are smart with the money tend to invest it rather than just save it or blow it. However, at some point, the government will have to turn off the printing press. But they're in a very sticky predicament if they do this, because on the one hand, if they keep printing money, they can keep this great economy, so to speak, moving in this direction, right? Everybody thinks that things are great right now because their investments are up. My house is worth more than ever. My stock market investments are up. But they have to realize that the only way to maintain this level of increase in gains is to keep that printing press on. And in case you're unaware, everybody can now realize how much this is starting to affect the price of everything across the board, which is called inflation. Because of inflation, the cost of everything is rising now. Just look at lumber costs and appliance costs for building new homes and how much the cost of building a new home has gone up in the last few months. You have to look at the cost of existing homes, how much that's going up. That's more of a supply and demand issue, but nonetheless, you could call that inflation because it costs more now than it did a few months ago, right? And the same thing's happening with other things such as gas and food, and who knows what else could get more expensive in the coming months. So that's the predicament that the government's in. If they keep printing the money at this rate and keep adding new dollars into the system, things will continually get exponentially more expensive. But as you know, if you're a normal person watching this who has a regular job, that your paycheck's probably not getting that much bigger. So if things are getting a lot more expensive and you're not making enough money to cover the new expenses, well, now we're in a problem. And that's why the government needs to decide at what point is going to be the threshold of where they're going to turn off the printing press and start reversing this trend and start raising interest rates. But the reason they don't want to do this is because if they do, then obviously real estate values will fall, and so will people's purchasing power because they won't have as much money in their pockets. And the one thing they fear, every politician fears, is nobody wants to have an economic collapse on their watch. Everybody wants to kick the can down the road so that way it affects the next politician in office and they can at least look like they had a clean record on their watch. It's a really unfortunate thing because who really pays for that is us, the American people. However, this isn't a political video, guys. We're talking about what's going to cause real estate prices to go down. And that's the first factor right there. Higher interest rates and money printing. Now, the next thing that could cause prices to go down is very similar to the last point, but a little bit different. If the price of houses continues to keep getting more expensive over the next couple years at the same rate that it has been, for example, well, now a lot of people who haven't seen that increase in their paycheck get any bigger are going to be completely priced out of being able to buy a home. And so I believe that the competition then at that point will fall drastically because the demand for people wanting to buy houses just won't be there because not everybody can afford to buy a house anymore. If a house that used to be 250 grand is now 400,000 and the $400,000 house is now 700,000, well, people can't buy that anymore because their income did not go up fast enough to keep up with the rising cost of the home. Therefore, there's just less buyers, and anybody that wants to sell and take advantage of how much their house is worth, they're going to be in for a surprise because they're going to see that there's really not that big of a pool of buyers left out there who can afford their home. And since real estate is heavily supply and demand driven, if you see a lot of people putting their houses on the market at a time when they think it's worth at an all-time high, now we could go back to having a buyer's market, because if they really do want to sell, then their only choice will be to lower the price of the house, therefore creating a buyer's market because we have more inventory than buyers. But this is all speculation. Nobody knows exactly how any of this is going to happen. I'm just giving you a few of my predictions on how it could happen, and how it ends up all playing out in the long run could end up being a combination of all of these things, or just one or two factors that brings the whole house of cards down. But that's yet to be seen. And just a quick reminder for anybody who is looking to move to the state of Florida, be sure to give my real estate team a call. All of the contact information for my team is down in the description below. And if you give us a call or an email, we'll be happy to help you with your Florida real estate needs. Now, this next point is highly specific to the state of Florida. Other states could be affected by these things as well, but this one really pertains to Florida. And we're talking about the weather in general. But what I'm really referring to here are possible major hurricanes. A lot of people that are moving here are new to the state. They've never experienced a hurricane before. They've only seen some things on TV and the Weather Channel, whatever, but none of that is a replacement for actually being here and going through one. So I feel like after a couple of years go by, if we are unlucky enough here in Florida to be struck by a major storm again, a lot of these people that moved here are probably going to leave because their homes could be destroyed. They might not have anywhere to live, but also the fear factor could play into it as well. They might be afraid to hang around because that could become a yearly thing. Every single year that goes by when you live in Florida and your area doesn't get decimated by a hurricane, you can just consider yourself lucky, because those storms do come and go. But where they end up and the intensity of them is always up for grabs, and it's something that just can't be predicted. But besides that, there are a couple other weather factors that kind of push people away that I've seen over the years, and usually it comes down to a lot of people just can't handle the year-round heat and humidity that we get here. Sure, the winter months are beautiful here in Florida, but the summers are long, hot, and brutal, and a lot of people that are moving here are probably just not used to that. Or maybe after a few years of being here, they'll realize how much they miss the seasons from up north and being able to, enjoy watching that transition from summer to fall and fall to winter and so on. And we really don't get that down here in Florida. And in my experience, a lot of people that move here, guys, a lot of them also leave within a few years as well. I don't know what's going to happen with all the newcomers coming to the state, if they're really going to stick around long term or not, but we'll see in a few more years, I suppose. Now, this next factor that could bring the property values and the market down here is something I kind of touched on in my last real estate video, but I didn't cover in detail. But this is the fact that because everyone's buying at super high prices right now, it can become a problem later when the market drops. And here's what I mean. So when I was looking at houses in St. Augustine, the house I was really interested in would be worth probably around $400,000 in real market value. However, the actual asking price of the house was $550,000, $150K over what the house's market value really is. And so one thing they required to purchase that house is waiving your appraisal contingency. That means when the house actually comes back and it only appraises for $400,000, but you have to pay $550,000 for it, well, guess what? You have to pay that extra $150,000 out of your pocket. Now, that's kind of an extreme case, but it's the perfect example of overpaying for a piece of property that's just not worth what people are claiming that it is. And so how this can affect normal people, even if you never had to do something like that to buy your house here in Florida, Let's say you bought a $400,000 house in Clearwater, Florida, for example. But just a year ago, that same house was only worth $250K. So in that example, if the market drops back down to where that house is only worth $250K, but you bought the house at 400 and say you put your 10% down as a regular homeowner moving into the single family home, now you owe more on the property than it's actually worth. And that puts you in a situation where you're officially underwater on your house, is what we call it in the real estate business. And being underwater just means that you owe more on the property than it's worth in today's market value. So if you had to sell the property in a pinch, say you lost your job or you need to sell because you're relocating for some reason, life happens, right? People have to sell real estate unexpectedly. Well, when that happens, a lot of people either end up in foreclosure because they just can't pay anymore if they end up losing their job, or what would happen to you instead, say you could still pay, but you did need to sell, now you'd be in a situation where you have to short sell the property. And short selling is basically something that's kind of extinct now, but it was a huge thing when I started in real estate because a lot of properties here were underwater back then. And so what happens is you need to ask the bank for forgiveness, essentially, because if you owe the bank 350 grand, but you can only sell the house for a maximum of 250, there's a $100,000 discrepancy there, and someone's going to have to take that loss. And when you do a short sale, you're basically asking the bank for forgiveness and let them take that loss, and in exchange you walk away from the sale owing nothing. But it doesn't really work like that anymore. You can still be on the hook nowadays for that extra 100K, which I'm not going to get into much in this video, but it's something to keep in mind that can put a lot of people in a dangerous situation who are buying right now at the peak of the market. Since it is the peak of the market, things can turn around very fast. Just as fast as they went up, they can go down. You could be one of those underwater homeowners in the near future, which can contribute to the market going down. Because if a lot of people are in that same situation, now they will be forced to sell. And with a lot of property coming on the market, well, guess what? That usually tanks prices because with a lot of inventory creates a buyer's market, and now prices need to come down because buyers have a lot of options again. Now, the next factor is property taxes and insurance costs on the home getting too expensive. So if you're one of these people that bought your property in the last few months at peak prices, you're also going to be paying peak real estate taxes because when your property gets reassessed for the following year, the county is going to see that you paid more for that house than it ever sold for in the past. Therefore, they can assess your house at a higher value, charge you higher real estate taxes. On top of that, before any of this even started, the insurance costs have already been on the rise down here in Florida because Florida is a very risky state to own a house in. A lot of insurers don't even want to insure houses here anymore with the sea level rise and the extreme threat of hurricanes and severe weather on a yearly basis, essentially. So a lot of insurance companies don't like to insure houses in Florida, and when they do, it costs a pretty penny. And it's getting more and more expensive every year, as you can imagine. The more expensive your house is, the more expensive it is to insure. So once people have all these expenses kind of stacking up on top of each other, it can become unaffordable. And then let's circle back to the situation where if you lose your job and now all of a sudden you can't pay for all these expenses, well, that goes back to being a foreclosure or a possible short sale scenario and putting more and more homes back on the market. Now, the last thing I want to cover is assuming everything stays like it is right now. Let's just say somehow the government's able to keep those printing presses running without us experiencing extreme inflation or hyperinflation, and people's jobs are going well, they're not losing their jobs, and they're making more money. Everything seems to be just going great. But one thing that can still affect the markets and possibly make things go down would be the fact that because a lot of people could be excluded from that club of who can afford real estate and who can't, you're going to have a lot of people just giving up. I've already seen some people in the comments after my last video saying that, well, this sucks. I was thinking about moving there in the next couple years, and now it looks like it's going to be unaffordable. Well, what I have to say to you people is you cannot give up, guys, because a lot can change even in 6 months, 8 months down the road, let alone a few years from now. Anything can happen. Who would have saw this happening? Just a year ago, prices were going down everywhere because the pandemic was at an all-time high and people were scared to move, essentially. Now, a year later, we have the vaccine. Everybody feels like they're back to normal and they're all on the move and the market's at an all-time high. So that just gives you a quick snapshot of how fast things can change in the real estate industry, and going down a little bit further down the road is no exception. If things keep going like this, for example, you're going to have a lot of people that are just getting priced out and they're just going to give up, which is going to make demand for houses kind of plummet because there's not going to be that many people interested in buying anymore simply because they can't. So that can affect prices and values. The other thing is, how fast are new construction homes going to be coming on the market? I've heard that some new construction companies are intentionally withholding inventory right now in hopes to capitalize on this crazy market. But they're going to be sorry they did that if things turn around just as quickly as they went up, because now they're going to be stuck with all this inventory with nobody left to buy it. So there's a lot of manipulation that always goes on when prices are high like this. Everyone's looking to cash in and take advantage of the situation. If enough people try doing that, what eventually is going to happen is things are just going to go back down because there's going to be too many obstacles for people to buy houses. There's just not many of them available. People can't find what they want for the price they want. Therefore, inventory is going to come on the market at cheaper prices because if people need to sell, right? Real estate's not a situation where people are always just selling because they want to make a ton of money. People need to move for various reasons, right? So there's always new inventory coming, but how much of it comes at once can be affected by a lot of things. And when people are playing manipulative games like this, then inevitably it's all going to come crashing down. The big thing is nobody really knows when. Just like we didn't know this was going to happen a year ago, we don't know what's going to happen in a year from now or 2 or 3 years down the road. But this is just my take on how prices could come crashing down. And in case you missed my last video about the Florida real estate market, go ahead and check it out right over here, and I'll catch you guys over there.